AWS reInvent is happening, and we are listening through all the announcements that's coming out. There were some serverless announcements, and we thought we will dissect them and see how it fits into the modern enterprise context. Are you ready? Serverless Fridays. This is a weekly show we host at Rishi.Research. We talk about how serverless technologies fit into the needs of individual developers, startups, and even enterprise developers. So we host it every week on Friday, and we post the videos here. We want to bring information from various developers on their experiences. We talk to industry leaders about what they think about serverless. It will be a very learning experience. And my name is Krish Subramanian. I am the founder and chief research advisor at Rishi.Research. Today I have with me Rodric Rabbah, who is CTO of Nimbella. And we are going to dissect all the news coming from AWS reInvent. And we are going to discuss how it fits into the modern enterprise landscape. Rodric, welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Krish. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share some of the insights with you and get your perspective on what's happening with reInvent. I am the co-founder of Nimbella, which is building a serverless cloud. And we're looking at essentially making the cloud more accessible and portable to organizations of developers of all skill sets.
Let's set some context. Some of the announcements that came out of AWS reInvent so far regarding serverless are about increasing the compute capacity of the Lambda functions, adding support for containers so that you can encapsulate the code, and adding some operational insights for on CloudWatch so that you can manage the serverless functions, and then support for batch functions and etc. So I would love to sort of get your perspective on what made you look up into these announcements and what was interesting?
Right. I think what was most amazing to me is how many serverless announcements there were by Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS, during his opening keynote. And I walk away from that, and I think what it demonstrates is that Amazon and AWS is going to continue to win the majority of serverless business in the foreseeable future. But I also walked away feeling that there's great validation for our work that we're doing both at my company, at Nimbella, and in open source as part of the Apache serverless platform called OpenWhisk. And the reason the announcements really were exciting for us at Nimbella is that, as I said, we're building a serverless cloud. We are already helping organizations accelerate their serverless journey, whether it's on AWS or any cloud that they happen to be committed to. And we all know migration from one cloud to the next is difficult. It's time consuming, it's expensive. So if you want AWS on the cloud where you are now, and you're seeing all these announcements and wondering, what has your cloud done for you lately? Come talk to us at Nimbella. This is what was really most exciting to me.
Before we dissect more on the announcements that came out of AWS reInvent regarding serverless, let's talk a little bit about why serverless is getting so much traction. After Amazon announced AWS Lambda, I've been seeing the number of people attending AWS Lambda sessions in reInvent. It has been skyrocketing. The sessions are getting sold out really fast. So I've been seeing developer interest for the past several years. Now I am seeing enterprise interest in serverless too. You speak with the enterprise customers regularly. Can you tell why serverless is attractive for enterprises?
I think it comes down to the agility that organizations can really start to operate on once they embrace a serverless mentality. In my perspective, and I think in yours, there's really no doubt that the future of the cloud is serverless. And in the keynote, it was mentioned that half of new applications that Amazon's building is now powered by Lambda, which is a serverless functions platform. And the number of Lambdas last year was in the 2 to 3 trillion a month. And that was a year ago. And where do you think that number is now with half of Amazon applications being powered by Lambda? So any talk of serverless adoption really stalling, for me, is hard to believe. But if you put it another way, right, the gap where many organizations are now and where they need to be serverless is perhaps too wide. And this is the pain point that we see. And when we started talking early on in my days of the startup about serverless, we realized it was kind of a non-starter for many. It was just too hard to wrap their heads around. They're just organizations, for a large part, aren't structured to reinvent themselves at the pace that AWS does. Or even move nimbly. And so that's why a gentle migration strategy is important from where you are now. And the majority of the enterprise today is not serverless. It's in containers, it's in sort of old legacy applications and monolith. But the serverless is future, and many recognize that. And so one is dispelling the notion that serverless is immature or not ready for large-scale applications was something we had to work on. The other is, how do we help you migrate? But what we don't have to spend a lot of time convincing others of is that this ability to go serverless helps you unlock so much trapped potential in your organization, which now can be repurposed and refocused to deliver value to your business. And once you start talking in these terms, it's a very easy conversation. Now it's about how do we help you get there and how fast we can do that. And what's sure to me is that AWS is expanding their portfolio faster than ever. And what was already large and complicated cloud to use before reInvent is even more complicated and impenetrable to developers who are sort of just starting their cloud journey. The sheer volume of services, the alternatives that they offer is mind-boggling. I mean, if you're new to AWS and you're looking at containers, do you use EKS? Do you use Fargate? Do you now use Lambda with containers? Which one? How do you make that choice? And this is what creates the opportunity for other startups. Like, I'll mention Stackery or Begin. And really, it's looking at wrangling the AWS complexity. And of course, our serverless company, Nimbella, where our goal is really to make the idea, or going from conception of idea to code in the cloud with as little friction as possible. So by pushing up the stack, targeting the developer experience, providing the gentle migration strategy on the cloud where you are now, making it more accessible, easier, this is what's really appealing, what's exciting, where I think there's a lot of opportunity for us.
I agree. And I think part of the misconception about serverless not gaining traction is because some of these people who run the survey see serverless as Kubernetes versus serverless. Rather, it's about a spectrum of services. And as people get comfortable, they move up the stack towards serverless. I think the way industry looks at all these things is a little confusing and unnecessary. Anyhow, let's shift gears and talk about the announcements. In fact, some of the announcements, or many of the announcements about serverless, are about catching up in the industry. For example, container support on AWS Lambda, IBM has been doing from day one, and Nimbella is doing. There are many others who are doing it. Then increasing the compute size. Again, it's a catch-up strategy. Showing operational insights for Lambda inside CloudWatch. I think others are doing. Nimbella is also doing. There are others who are doing it. So it's more like catching up with what is happening in the industry. But the fact that AWS is doing it means it's a validation for what others have been doing, especially the startups. And what are the announcements that really sort of what do you think of these announcements? And what do you think is exciting?
Right. I think the keynote really had something for everyone. So if you look at announcements targeted at developers, some of what you just touched on now, if you're a developer, you're already using Lambda, or you're thinking about how to use Lambda, this narrowing of the gap between serverless functions and containers, where you can now package your code not just as a zip file, but as a container that you can replicate and build locally on your machine, makes the onboarding ramp much easier to go through. But as you said, in the totality of the cloud, this is not new. But for AWS to finally offer it is great validation, because for them to do it at the scale that they have to do it is remarkable. And their focus on customer success and developer needs, not only validates what we've done with OpenWhisk and Nimbella, which we've offered from day one, but other cloud providers. And serverless containers for AWS, I think, are likely driven by the AI and ML workloads, where now if you want to package TensorFlow or similar ML frameworks into your runtime, tailor them to your needs, you can do it without working in the constraints that Lambda imposes on you. You have more memory, more CPU as well for running these workloads. So if you're doing serverless Lambda for inference, now this is pretty convenient and very attractive. And I'm expecting that Lambda with GPU support, graphics processing units, will eventually land. Maybe at the next reInvent, we'll see that.
Absolutely. I think I am also expecting Lambda's support for GPU support for Lambda. And as you said, maybe we will see it in the next reInvent. One of the things I want to highlight is the fact that the container support which AWS Lambda has added is about encapsulating the code and pushing it to Lambda. It is about improving the developer experience. There seems to be some conversation about comparing this with Google Cloud Run. They are all two different services. It's apples to oranges comparison. This is about packaging your code and pushing it to Lambda so that Lambda executes in a way they have been executing the code so far. Whereas Google Cloud Run is about not only packaging the code in containers, but also it's an execution engine. It's you run the code there. So comparing these two or comparing this announcement with the AWS Fargate doesn't make any sense. So now let's shift gears. One of the most interesting thing for me in AWS reInvent so far is AKS everywhere and ECS everywhere, or AKS anywhere and ECS anywhere. But you have been, Nimbella has been doing this on the serverless abstraction for quite some time. Nimbella runs on multiple cloud providers. It can be deployed on premises. How do you see that announcement? And do you expect this is the stepping stone for eventually making Fargate anywhere and Lambda anywhere?
Right. Yeah. I think, with EKS, this is a Kubernetes distribution by AWS. So now you can take that distribution and run it anywhere, essentially on any cloud. So it's clearly an indication that AWS is thinking about multi-cloud in some form. And for AWS, I think this also sends a signal that not only are we dominating the market share on our cloud, but because of the pace of innovation and of the offerings that they have, they're also trying to extend to other clouds. How far will it go? It's a great question. We can certainly speculate. I think EKS and the ecosystem around Kubernetes is largely open source. With Lambda, supporting containers, AWS had to provide reference container images. The runtime implementations are also open and part of the open source. And then the underlying technology that Amazon uses for running the Lambdas in AWS, this is Firecracker, is also open source. So how much more will AWS do in open source? I know you care very deeply about this topic, but a lot of the nuggets of the components that you need to build a serverless Lambda offering that's open source already exist. And in some ways, in OpenWhisk, we can actually run Lambdas in Firecracker. We've prototyped that. And it is taking a different approach, I think, to serverless on Kubernetes that's different from Cloud Run, right? The programming model is different. You're not thinking about opening a server and opening a port and writing the server-fault code. Moreover, it's the intra-container concurrency, whether it's one request per container, one request per Lambda, or many. There's a lot of trade-offs that then as a developer, you have to start thinking about. I think the simplicity of Lambda is one event, one function, infinite scale, is much easier to reason about when you're thinking about distributed systems, data races, and the things that really make cloud programming difficult. So my view is that this reach of AWS into both open source and multi-cloud is again validation, and by picking the right abstraction layers in the stack creates opportunities for startups like ours.
Absolutely. I think I agree with you. And the fact that AWS is also going in the direction where the rest of the industry is going is sort of like it reduces the confusion for enterprise customers, and maybe it stabilizes the conversation around how various technologies can be used. And I think from that angle, the announcements coming out of reInvent is good for the industry and good for the enterprise customers too. Maybe enterprises will be comfortable adopting serverless from now on.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a clear difference between the bits you put out in open source and the expertise required to run it, especially at scale. And AWS is perhaps doing it better than anyone else. Of course, it's caused friction in various open source communities, But I think what it shows is that if you were to open source a Lambda implementation or go after Kubernetes, this is one way to do it. And they would be in a position to do that. But until that happens, if you're looking for an open source alternative to AWS Lambda, I'll plug Apache OpenWhisk. It's the best serverless open source platform that gives you the programming model that Lambda is really just starting to offer, and has many different things they've announced with step functions and synchronous data flow, containers as functions, etc., all packaged in a nice Apache license project.
Yeah, I think I will take that to plug the panel we had with the Apache OpenWhisk panel a few weeks back. If you go to Rishi.Research's YouTube channel, you can find the video of the panel discussion we had. And I think what we saw in the reInvent this year regarding serverless is encouraging, and probably it's showing that the serverless market is maturing, and it will be exciting to see where we go from here. And next year or next 2 years is going to be pretty interesting for serverless in the serverless market. So thanks, Rodric. It was a great conversation, and looking forward to having you in one of the future shows.
Thanks, Krish, for having me. Thank you again.
If you like this conversation, please hit the like button in YouTube or Facebook. If you want to get notified every time we post a video on Serverless Friday, hit that subscribe button and click that notification icon so that you will get notified every time we post a video. On Wednesdays, we host a Modern Enterprise Tech Show. On Fridays, we host Serverless Fridays, and we are looking forward to talking to you more in 2021. Thanks, Rodric, and we will probably come back and take stock during next reInvent.
Sounds good. Thanks, Krish.